Everyone finds something worth holding on to in the world, however wasted its opportunities. These are the words spoken by Joyce, a bourgeois strikebreaker, but a rather pleasant one nonetheless. And I feel no other moment encapsulates what Disco Elysium means to me than that one. Above all else, Disco Elysium is a game about change, evolution, and seemingly in contradiction, decay. These contradictions are abound in Disco Elysium, these opposing forces that dictate the way of the world, from communists to fascists, to matter versus a mysterious force known as the Pale. The world is built atop these contradictions, and they struggle against each other and change and dictate the course of history. You could, and I will, call it dialectics. At one point, that contradiction stood most prominently between the proletariat, the workers, represented by the communists, and the bourgeoisie, represented by the monarchy. Revachol once stood on the precipice of great change. A communist revolution took hold, one that was violently shut down by foreign actors. And ever since, Revachol and Martinez has not only stagnated, but actively decayed. If you speak to the people around, they will report the same. This is evident in the so-called doomed commercial district, a district in which businesses constantly fail. Some say it's caused by a mystical curse. Others say it's simply the symptom of a much larger disease, a disease that Krasmazov would tell you about had he not shot himself in the mouth to avoid being lynched by counter-revolutionaries. It's a dreary world in Martinez and Revachol, which I'm sure a lot of us can sympathize with. The one time things started to truly arc towards justice, justice was stamped out, lined up in front of a wall, and shot dead. But that is not all Disco Elysium is about. It is not only a story about nihilistic hopelessness in the face of decay and failure. Quite the opposite. It's about pursuing something greater than yourself, perhaps an ideology, an attempt to remedy the cruelty of the world, or honestly simply make sense of it. What Disco Elysium has to say about the human condition is both quite sincere and in many cases quite cynical. It's a balancing act that the game performs, in my opinion, a quite admirable job of walking. Sometimes it does tend to dip into the cynical, but who can blame it? Look around you at the bombed out buildings, at the poor barely scraping by, at the people drinking themselves into oblivion every night, the mentally ill being abandoned by their families and left to wander the streets alone, at the kids addicted to speed. How can you live in this world and not occasionally dip into the cynical? It wears you down bit by bit. You don't even have to live in a society that once stood on the cusp of something great to recognize it. It's the slow downfall of everything. And here comes what is, in my opinion, the most outwardly nihilistic theme of Disco Elysium. In the end, even if something great were to be made, even if justice were to be achieved, it would all be for nothing, as the Pale, a sort of antimatter force that destroys everything it touches, slowly eats away at everything, growing and growing until eventually nothing remains. In our universe, it could be compared to the eventual heat death of everything, of the universe. So what do you do to not fall into that same cynicism and ironic detachment? How do you keep on moving if everything always seems to get worse? Well, in many of our cases, you find a cause and you dedicate yourself to it. Even if it will all be for nothing, at least you aren't sitting by and letting evil have its way. At least you are resisting the so-called inevitable. At least you are fighting. In most of my playthroughs, I have played as a communist cop. I usually start the game with another playstyle in mind, but I always just arc back to communism because I find it really hard, even in video games, to be like an asshole. But nonetheless, I play as a communist because, one, I find the irony between being a cop and a communist to be quite amusing and funny. And also because, most of the time that's where my sympathies in real life tend to lie. When playing as a communist, you are given the option of adopting the thought Mazovian socioeconomics, the in-universe form of Marxism. And when I first read the contents of this thought, it immediately told me this game was made by communists, because only one group can truthfully and honestly criticize communism and communists, and that group is other communists. Here is the text of the original thought. People thought that communism was some crazy idea that had its comeuppance 40 years ago, a fever that shook the world, never to return again. They were right, until he woke up today, a spiritual corpse responsive only to the call of Commodore Red, prostitutes, and Krasmazov. For him, communism is still a thing. He will single-handedly raise the commune of O2 from the oceanic trench where it has been resting, covered in ghosts and seaweed. He is the big communism builder. Come, witness his attempt to rebuild communism in the year 51. After you finish internalizing the thought, this is the solution the game gives to you. 0.000% of communism has ever been built. Evil, child-murdering billionaires still rule the world with a shit-eating grin. All he has managed to do is make himself sad. He is starting to suspect Krasmazov fucked him over personally with his socio-economic theory. It has, however, made him into a very, very, very smart boy with something like a university degree in truth. Instead of building communism, he now builds a precise model of this grotesque, duplicitous world. When I first read that, my reaction was equal parts laughter and despair. I think every single one of us who has ever held beliefs similar to this has felt exactly that at one point or another in our political journey. Being awoken to these things, these constant injustices, and never seeing really any progress towards remedying them. Well, let's just say there is a reason why so many communists and socialists hide behind hundreds of layers of irony. It's because it's fucking sad to be aware, and at the same time be aware that you are completely and utterly powerless. After a while, really all you can do is build that precise model of this grotesque and duplicitous world. So, if that's what it's like, if all it does is manage to make you really, really sad and apathetic, then what is the point? After playing as a communist for long enough, you will be given what's called a vision quest. The objective of this quest, get organized. This starts by sniffing out the fellow communists around you and ends with you attending the meeting of a local communist book club. And just like always, you haven't exactly done the reading. When speaking to the two communists who run the reading group, you can ask them the most important questions about communism. For me, I ask the same question I've asked so many times in my own life. If we keep failing, if capitalist billionaires still rule the world on a throne of child corpses, and if the few people angry enough about it would rather break off into 47 different splinter groups, and if 0.001% of communism has ever been built, well then what is the point? The leader of the book club thought about that question for a while, and he gave the same answer I've been giving myself for so many years.
Yes, in fact. My mom's. She works in La Delta, in one of those skyscrapers. But it's not like you think. She's a cleaning lady. But how did you... Oh, never mind. I guess I'm easier to read than I thought. I want us all to live in a better world. But yes, she's a part of it. I guess we're all a part of it.
The point is to imagine something better, even if it's unrealistic, even if it seems impossible, even in the face of failure after failure after failure. We have to be able to imagine something, anything, better than what we have. Because look around you. Not just in Revachol, not just in Martinez, but in our own world. People starve to death on the streets. People a world away from you have bombs dropped on their houses every single day. People in Palestine are corralled into what is essentially the world's largest concentration camp. Let's just be honest for a second. This shit fucking sucks. It's awful. And if this is the very best we can hope for, if this is all we can imagine, what is the point? To consume until you die? to get to the top and in the process stomp on the throats of others, to finally get to be the one who does the oppression instead of having it done to you? I don't know about you guys, but if that's all we can hope for, that's just really sad. In the world of Disco Elysium, everything is eventually pointless. Someday the pale will engulf all of matter and leave nothing. But does this mean we cannot fight for what is right in the time given to us? Does eventual pointlessness mean we must simply allow injustice to continue? Or does it make our cause even more worthwhile? If everything will someday end, shouldn't we try and foster a fairer and more just world in the time allowed to us? Shouldn't we fight for justice? Any sort of leftist ideology is about holding on to anything that makes you believe something better can come out of this wretched, broken, and unfair world. Just being able to hold on to something in this world, however wasted its opportunities, as said by Joyce, the ultra-liberal. It says quite a lot about this game that, in my opinion, two of the most profound moments come from completely contradictory ideologies, an ultra-liberal and a communist. Joyce is a nice person to talk to, her politics aside, yet I'd love to ask her, as an ultra-liberal, what is she holding on to? The idea that justice can somehow just pop out of the inherently broken system we currently live under? I'm sure she'd have an answer to that question if I were able to ask it. The book club leader tells the story about a communist revolutionary who, on the last night of his life before he was shot to death, wrote a poem. It ends with, "In dark times, should the stars also go out?" We live in dark times, that is for sure. The fascists are on a death march, the left is fractured, and 60% of it is willing to bend the knee to bourgeoisie dictatorship. People freeze to death or overdose on the streets. It is a dark time. But does that mean we cannot imagine something greater? Does that mean we cannot look up to the stars and wonder in amazement at the endless possibilities that exist in our finite time? In dark times, should the stars also go out? Humanity really does have potential. Every day I see things that remind me of the goodness of the average person, but that goodness in this system is spoiled. It turns people into wretched human beings. It turns people selfish. It turns them mean, and it makes them angry. But it doesn't have to be that way. Things can be better, and I always try and remember that. And if not remember, then at least imagine a world where people actually cared for one another. A world where we aren't completely isolated from one another, where we aren't all fighting each other for the scraps that fall off the table, where we are all united in a common mission of justice. Perhaps that is unrealistic, perhaps it's idealistic, perhaps it's naive. But I will tell you, I once forgot the point of fighting, of imagining something better, and I did surrender myself to nihilism and hopelessness. At the time, I believed I was simply being realistic, and maybe I was, in all honesty. But it left me empty, left me dead, figuratively and almost literally. It ended much like it began in the game with Harry Dubois. In a destroyed room with a pounding headache, a sea of empty bottles on the ground, and the shock of seeing the man in the mirror. If that's what being realistic looks like, I don't know about you, but I think I'd rather be naive. So when I sat in front of that unpainted wall, I didn't allow the ruin and the waste of Revachol and Martinez to stop me from holding on to at least a little bit of hope. And this is what I chose to paint. Thank you for watching.